Once, there was a place that most avoided, a realm of shadows, mysteries, and secrets, known only as the dark web. The stories I am about to recount delve deep into the enigmatic corridors of this hidden world, where the brave, or foolish, seek things best left unfound. In the quiet town of Eddington, Sarah, a college student with an intense curiosity and a penchant for the occult, stumbled upon an online forum. It was late at night, and the wind howled ominously outside her window. Illuminated only by the dim glow of her laptop, she navigated through layers of encrypted pages until she arrived at a site that promised to reveal the true face of the supernatural. Intrigued, Sarah clicked through. As she delved deeper, the air around her grew inexplicably colder. From the speakers of her computer, faint whispers emerged, growing clearer with each page she browsed. "Who seeks knowledge, pays the price," the voice hissed, sending shivers down her spine. Unnerved, yet unable to tear herself away, Sarah continued, her fingers trembling over the keyboard. The next page loaded, and an image flickered on the screen. It was a picture of an old, decrepit house with windows like dark, staring eyes. The caption underneath read, "The cursed home, enter if you dare." Sarah's breath hitched as the address below the caption revealed it to be in her own town, only a few streets away. Compelled by a mixture of fear and intrigue, Sarah grabbed her coat and flashlight. Her heart pounding, she ventured into the chilly night, drawn to the address from the website. The street was silent, save for the rustling of dry leaves and the distant echo of a dog barking. The house loomed ahead, its silhouette a stark contrast against the pale moonlight. As she approached the gate, the whispers from her laptop seemed to follow her, swirling in the wind. "Turn back, turn back." Ignoring the chills that danced up her spine, Sarah pushed the gate open, its creak echoing through the empty street. She stepped onto the property, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. Sarah's flashlight beam landed on a staircase leading up to the darkness above. Each step she took was met with the groan of old wood, protesting her presence. The house felt alive, aware of her every move. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the upper floor, followed by the sound of something heavy dragging across the floorboards. Sarah's heart raced, her breath coming out in visible puffs in the cold air of the house. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice quivering. No answer came, only the sound of her own heartbeat thudding in her ears. Steeling her nerves, she climbed the staircase. At the top, the hallway stretched ominously before her, doors lining each side. The dragging sound continued, now accompanied by a low moan that seemed to seep through the walls. Sarah approached the door at the end of the hall. The noises were louder now, more desperate. With a trembling hand, she reached for the knob, her other hand clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. She turned the knob, the door creaking open to reveal a room shrouded in darkness. Inside, the air was frigid, colder than the rest of the house. Her flashlight flickered as if struggling against an unseen force. Then, from the shadows, a figure slowly emerged. It was a woman, her eyes hollow, her skin ashen and stretched tight over her bones. She pointed at Sarah, her mouth moving, but no sound came out. Sarah stepped back, her mind racing. The woman in the room was the same one from another story she had read on the dark web, the story of a woman cursed to haunt her childhood home after dabbling in dark arts she couldn't control. Was this the price of her curiosity? Frozen with fear, Sarah watched as the woman's form became more solid, more menacing. The whispers returned, louder now, a cacophony of voices that filled the room. "Leave, now, or join her," they moaned. Heart pounding, Sarah turned and ran, the woman's ghostly wails following her down the staircase. She burst out of the house, the night air never having felt so welcoming. She didn't stop running until she reached her own door, slamming it shut behind her. Breathing heavily, Sarah leaned against the door. The quiet of her own home was a stark contrast to the horrors of the house she had fled. But as her breathing slowed and the adrenaline faded, she realized the voices hadn't stopped at the house. They were here, in her room, whispering from the corners, from her laptop speakers, She approached her computer warily. The screen was still on, displaying the last page she had visited on the dark web. Only now, the text had changed. "Welcome home, Sarah," it read. "It's too late to leave now. The story doesn't end here. Sarah's journey into the dark web has only just begun, and what awaits her is a web of mysteries, each more terrifying than the last. What dark secrets does the web hold? What price must Sarah pay for her curiosity? As the line between the digital and the real blurs, so does her path to escape. The whispers in Sarah's room grew louder, a chorus of ghostly voices that seemed to vibrate through the very walls. Her laptop screen flickered erratically, as if caught in an electrical storm. Despite her overwhelming fear, Sarah was drawn back to her computer, compelled by a force she couldn't resist. She sat down, her fingers hesitating over the keyboard. "What do you want from me?" she typed, her breath visible in the cold air that now filled her room. The response on the screen was almost instantaneous. "We've been waiting for you, Sarah. You invited us in." The words scrolled across her monitor in a sickly, green hue. The temperature dropped further, and Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. She could feel the presence of those she had unwittingly summoned, closing in around her. Determined to understand the depth of her plight, Sarah revisited the forum on the dark web. The sight seemed different now, more menacing. The background was a deeper shade of black, and the text, a glaring red that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. She clicked on a link that read, "The Price of Curiosity." As the page loaded, images flashed across the screen, faces of people, twisted in horror, locations that looked eerily familiar, and symbols that made her skin crawl. The article detailed accounts of others who had ventured too deeply into the dark web, seeking knowledge or thrills, only to disappear without a trace. Some were found, days or weeks later, their minds shattered, speaking incoherently of shadows and whispers. Others were never seen again, their last known activity traced back to the very forum Sarah had been browsing. A cold realization washed over her. She was not the first to summon these entities, and she might not be the last. As she read, the whispers in her room coalesced into a single, discernible voice. "Join us, Sarah. Share our fate." The voice was both seductive and terrifying, pulling at the edges of her sanity. She slammed her laptop shut, but the voice continued, echoing in her mind. In a panic, she grabbed her phone, intent on calling for help. But as she dialed, the phone slipped from her trembling hands, crashing to the floor. The battery popped out, leaving her in silence. The darkness seemed to press in on her, tangible and suffocating. She crawled to the corner of her room, pulling her knees to her chest, her eyes wide with terror. Outside, the wind picked up, battering against the windows with increased ferocity. The room grew colder still, and Sarah could see her breath puffing out in frantic bursts. Shadows danced along the walls, forming grotesque shapes that seemed to mock her plight. The whispering voice grew louder, more demanding. "There is no escape, Sarah. You are ours now." Despite her fear, a spark of defiance ignited within Sarah. She was not ready to succumb to whatever fate these creatures had in store for her. She remembered reading about digital exorcisms, a fringe practice believed by some to cleanse electronic devices of malevolent entities. It was a long shot, but it was all she had left. She scrambled to her feet, rushing to her laptop. Powering it on, she began searching for anything that could help her. Her hands shook as she typed, every creak of the house amplifying her fear. Pages loaded slowly, as if resisting her efforts, but finally, she found a site. It offered rituals and incantations said to protect and cleanse. With no other options, she began to read aloud, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. As she spoke the ancient words, the air around her vibrated. The whispers grew into shouts, angry and violent. The room shook, books falling from shelves, pictures from walls. Sarah continued, louder now, her voice cutting through the tumult. The ritual demanded a sacrifice, something of personal value. Without hesitation, Sarah grabbed a locket her mother had given her, a precious memento. She placed it on the laptop keyboard, her hands trembling as she completed the final incantations. Suddenly, the air snapped, like a massive pressure being released. Silence fell over the room, deafening in its intensity. Sarah gasped for breath, her body and mind pushed to the limit. She waited, her eyes darting around the room, half expecting the shadows to converge on her. But nothing came. The shadows receded, and the temperature in the room began to normalize. Cautiously, she reached for her laptop. The screen was blank, the ominous form gone, as if it had never existed. Relief washed over her, mingled with exhaustion. However, as she sat back, her relief was short-lived. Her phone buzzed, the battery somehow back in place. With a trembling hand, she picked it up. The screen showed a notification from an unknown number. "You think you are safe now? This is just the beginning, Sarah." Her heart sank as she realized the depth of her situation. She had only touched the surface of the dark web's darkness, and it had marked her. As the night stretched on, Sarah knew she had to prepare. Whatever was coming for her, she was no longer just a victim, she was a fighter. But deep down, she understood that this was far from over. The dark web had ensnared her in its web, and the true horror was yet to unfold. As Sarah stared at the cryptic message on her phone, the shadows around her seemed to pulsate, as if breathing. Her heart pounded, echoing in her ears like a relentless drum. She knew that whatever respite she had gained was only temporary. The entities from the dark web were far from finished with her. The realization sent a chill down her spine, cold and foreboding. Determined not to succumb to fear, Sarah began to plan her next move. She researched more about the digital realm's dark underbelly, uncovering stories of others who had faced similar horrors and survived. These tales spoke of digital footprints, left unwittingly, that could be erased or altered to throw off pursuers. Armed with this new knowledge, Sarah set about cleansing her online presence, deleting accounts and changing usernames. But as she worked, the electronics around her started to malfunction. Her laptop screen flickered violently, and the phone's battery drained and recharged sporadically. The air around her grew thick, charged with static. Whispers returned, now mocking, "You cannot hide, Sarah. We see you, we see all." Her hands shook, but she pressed on, her determination unwavering. In the midst of her efforts, a loud knock jolted Sarah from her focus. The sound resonated through the house, heavy and ominous. Approaching the door hesitantly, Sarah peered through the peephole. Outside, under the flickering porch light, stood a figure shrouded in darkness. Its features were obscured, but its presence was menacing. Sarah backed away from the door, her mind racing. The knocking continued, each thud against the wood reverberating like a warning. "Leave me alone," she shouted, her voice cracking with the strain of her terror. The knocking ceased abruptly, replaced by a low, guttural laugh that seeped through the cracks of the door. Realizing that physical and digital barriers might not be enough to protect her, Sarah turned to more esoteric means. She found references to protective symbols and rituals that could ward off evil. With no time to spare, she gathered materials around her house, drawing symbols on windows and doors, reciting incantations that were foreign to her tongue. The atmosphere in her home grew heavier, the air now tinged with a palpable sense of dread. Lights flickered, casting long shadows that twisted and turned like living things. The temperature dropped, breath visible in the air, as if the house itself had been transported to a colder, darker realm. Then, suddenly, all fell silent. The oppressive feeling lifted momentarily, giving Sarah a sliver of hope. She took a deep breath, her body and mind exhausted from the ordeal. Perhaps, she thought, she had done enough to protect herself. But as she turned, her eyes caught the reflection in a mirror across the room. Standing behind her was the figure from the porch, its features now visible. Hollow eyes, a gaunt face, and a smile too wide to be human. Sarah's scream caught in her throat, her body frozen in terror. The figure moved closer, its movements jerky and unnatural. "You cannot escape, Sarah," it hissed, its voice a cacophony of the voices she had heard whispering from her devices. "You invited us in, and here we shall stay." The creature reached for her, its hands cold and ethereal. In a final act of desperation, Sarah grabbed the nearest symbol she had drawn and thrust it towards the figure. A blinding light filled the room, and a deafening roar echoed around her. The creature recoiled, its form dissipating like smoke in the wind. As the light faded, Sarah collapsed to the floor, her energy spent. The room returned to normal, the early morning light creeping through the curtains. She lay there for a long time, her breathing slow and heavy, her mind grappling with the night's horrors. The battle may have been won, but Sarah knew the war was far from over. The dark web had marked her, its denizens knew her name. As she gathered her strength, she understood what she needed to do next. She would have to delve deeper, to understand the origins of these entities, to find a way to end their torment permanently. This story, her story, was not yet complete, and she would be ready when the darkness called again. As dawn broke, casting a soft glow through the curtains, Sarah sat amidst the remnants of her protective circle, her mind teetering between relief and dread. The silence was profound, almost suffocating, after the cacophony of the night's terror. She knew that her encounter had marked a turning point. No longer could she live in ignorance of the dark forces that lurked just beyond the veil of the digital screen. Gathering her strength, Sarah decided to confront the source of her torment. She knew that cutting off her connection with the dark web would not be enough. She needed to understand it, to find its weakness. She rebooted her laptop, her hands steadier now, her resolve hardened by the ordeal she had endured. The device hummed to life, its screen flickering momentarily as if hesitant to reveal its secrets once more. She navigated back to the occult forum, her eyes scanning the cryptic texts and eerie images that no longer seemed just digital artifacts but portents of something much more sinister. Deep in the threads, hidden beneath layers of code and whispers, Sarah found what she was looking for, the origin tale of the dark web entity known as the Weaver, a digital ghost born from the collective fears and darkest desires of its users. The Weaver, the legend said, feeds on curiosity and grows stronger with each soul it ensnares. The story detailed a ritual, one that could banish the Weaver back to the digital shadows from whence it came, but it required a sacrifice of great personal value. Sarah knew what she must do. With a heavy heart, she prepared for the ritual. She gathered items of personal significance, each a token of her life before the darkness had touched it. Photos of her family, letters from friends, her mother's locket, all laid out with trembling hands. She began the incantation, her voice echoing through the now silent house. As she spoke the final words, the air around her crackled with energy. Her laptop screen burst to life, displaying swirling patterns of code and light. The Weaver appeared before her, its form more terrifying than any ghost or specter of flesh and blood. It was a maelstrom of digital noise and static, its eyes voids that seemed to pull at her soul. "You cannot banish me, Sarah," it hissed, its voice a distorted warble. "I am made of the fears of thousands. I am eternal." Sarah stood firm, holding the locket in her outstretched hand. "You are made of shadows, and shadows wither in the light," she declared. With a swift motion, she placed the locket on her laptop's keyboard, the metal and memories grounding her resolve. A blinding light filled the room, and a scream, not of this earth, tore through the air. The Weaver writhed, its form dissipating like smoke in a gale. The light grew, enveloping everything, and Sarah felt a surge of warmth as the room returned to normal, the morning sun banishing the last of the unnatural cold. Exhausted but alive, Sarah slumped to the ground. The silence that filled the room was different now, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. She knew in her heart that the Weaver was gone, banished by her bravery and the purity of her sacrifice. In the days that followed, Sarah's life returned to a semblance of normality, but she was forever changed. She shared her story with those who would listen, warning them of the dangers that lurk in the unseen corners of the digital world. Her experience became a tale of caution in the occult forums, a reminder that some doors, once opened, lead to paths best left untraveled. Though the darkness had receded, Sarah kept the protective symbols on her windows and doors, a ward against the unknown. At night, when the world was quiet, she sometimes thought she could hear the faintest whispers, like echoes of a nightmare fading at dawn. But she no longer feared them. She had faced the abyss, and she had prevailed. Sarah's story, a testament to her courage and strength, ended not with a sunset, but with a sunrise. A new day, a new beginning, where the light shone all the brighter for the darkness it had dispelled.